It should have been just another quiet elk hunt deep in the Idaho backcountry. A skilled hunter, alone in the fog, waiting for his shot. But the silence that morning wasn't normal. The woods went dead still, then came a single knock echoing through the canyon. At first, he thought it was another hunter, till he found tracks. Nearly twice the size of his boots pressed into the mud. Over the next nights, the strange signs grew bolder, his trail camera ripped down, his kill bag dragged away without a tear, woven stick structures appearing near. Camp as if someone or something was sending a message. And then came the moment no hunter prepares for. In the mist, a towering figure stepped from the tree line, watching him in total silence. Instead of charging, it raised an arm as if reaching out. You being here means more than you know. If your heart still makes room for wonder and gentleness, then you're already one of us. I've been hunting these Idaho mountains for over 25 years, and I like to think I know them better than most. My name is Dale Kearns, and I've filled my freezer with elk meat every season since 1973. Some folks in town call me obsessive with my note-taking, but those detailed journals have never steered me wrong. On the morning of September 15th, 1998, I pulled my truck into the Clearwater National Forest trailhead, just as the sun was starting to paint the sky in shades of purple and orange. The familiar scent of pine needles and damp earth filled my lungs as I shouldered my pack. My compound bow, the same one I'd used for the past decade, felt like an old friend in my hands. Looking good for elk, I muttered to myself, checking the wind direction with a wet finger, a habit as natural as breathing. The morning air had that crisp fall bite that makes your nose tingle. Perfect hunting weather. I pulled out my worn leather journal and made my first entry of the day. 600 hours. Temperature 42 degrees Fahrenheit. Light wind from northwest. Heavy dew on ground. Some might laugh at my detailed notes, but these observations had helped me pattern elk movements for years. My pack held everything I needed for 3 days in the backcountry: my small tent, sleeping bag, dried food, water filter, and the essential survival gear I'd learned to never leave home without. That lesson came hard after a fall back in 1989 left me stuck overnight with a twisted ankle and the first stages of hypothermia. I don't talk about that much, but I never forgot it. The weight of my sidearm on my hip offered its usual comfort as I started up the trail. In these remote areas, it's just common sense to carry protection. Bears are common enough, and mountain lions, while rarely seen, are always around. I checked my topographical maps one last time before storing them in their waterproof case. The area I planned to hunt was about 4 miles in, near a series of meadows where I'd spotted good elk sign during scouting trips. No cell service out here. It was 1998, and besides, these canyons were too deep for signals anyway. My handheld radio might work from the ridgetops, but in the valleys, I'd be on my own. The trail steepened as I moved deeper into the forest. My boots made soft crunching sounds on the pine needles, and I paused every few hundred yards to scan the woods and make notes. 700 hours. Fresh elk droppings near creek crossing. Tracks heading northeast toward Upper Meadow. A group of ravens took flight ahead, their harsh calls echoing through the trees. I noted their direction. Birds often signal animal movement. The morning stretched on as I worked my way higher into familiar territory, though something felt different about the forest that day. Maybe it was just the changing seasons, but the usual squirrel chatter seemed subdued. I stopped at a small clearing to check my trail camera. which I'd set up 2 weeks ago during a scouting trip. The film card would hopefully show elk patterns, helping me plan my hunt more effectively. These cameras were relatively new technology for hunters back then, but I'd found them invaluable for understanding game movements. My methodical approach to hunting had earned me a reputation among local sportsmen. They'd often seek my advice about tracking and animal patterns, and I'd share what I knew, though never my best spots. Some called me a perfectionist, but I preferred to think of it as respectful. When you're hunting, you owe it to the animal to be as prepared and precise as possible. The morning sun was climbing higher as I made my way toward my intended camping spot. The day was shaping up exactly as I'd hoped. Cool, clear, and quiet. Perfect conditions for what I expected to be another successful elk season in my beloved Idaho backcountry. I've been hunting these Idaho mountains for over 25 years, and I like to think I know them better than most. My name is Dale Kearns, and I've filled my freezer with elk meat every season since 1973. Some folks in town call me obsessive with my note-taking, but those detailed journals have never steered me wrong. On the morning of September 15th, 1998, I loaded up my Ford pickup and headed into the Clearwater National Forest. The familiar drive up the winding Forest Service road felt like coming home. My bow sat securely in its case beside me, along with my well-worn pack and the leather-bound journal I've carried on every hunt for the past decade. The deeper I drove into the wilderness, the more the landscape transformed. Steep ridges rose. Up on either side, their slopes thick with towering ponderosa pines and Douglas firs that seemed to touch the clouds. Through my open window, I could smell the rich earth and decaying leaves that marked the changing season. The morning fog hung heavy between the trees, making the forest look like something from an old photograph. I parked at my usual spot, a small clearing about 8 miles in from the main road. The temperature gauge on my dash read 42 degrees Fahrenheit, a perfect fall morning for bow hunting. The fog had settled into the valleys, creating a ghostly landscape where sound didn't travel quite right. It was the kind of morning where you could hear a twig snap from 50 yards away, but couldn't tell which direction it came from. Setting up camp was second nature to me. I'd picked this spot years ago for its natural advantages. A slight rise that gave me a good view of the surrounding area, close to a cold mountain creek for water, and just the right mix of cover and clearance. My hands moved automatically through the familiar motions, setting up my tent, arranging my gear, hanging my food bag. But something felt off. I couldn't put my finger on it at first, and I'm not the type to jump at shadows. I've spent more nights in these woods than some folks spend in their own beds. Still, as I worked, I kept stopping to listen. The forest was too quiet, not the peaceful kind of quiet you get on a still morning, but something different. Usually there'd be squirrels chattering, jays calling back and forth, the soft rustling of small animals in the underbrush. Even with the fog dampening things down, there should have been more life in these woods. I've learned over the years that when the forest goes quiet, it's trying to tell you something. I pulled out my journal and made a note of it, along with the date, time, and weather conditions. Some might call it excessive, but I've found that small details matter. They build up over time, creating patterns that can mean the difference between a successful hunt and going home empty-handed. The fog started lifting around 10 o'clock, but that strange stillness persisted. I finished setting up camp, my gear as I always do. My bow case went in the tent, along with my sleeping bag and extra clothes. I set up my small cook stove on a flat rock, arranged my water filtration system near the creek, and strung up a basic tarp shelter, just in case the weather turned dot. Everything was exactly where it should be, just as I'd done it hundreds of times before, but that nagging feeling of wrongness wouldn't leave me. I sat on a log near my tent, scanning the tree line and making another note in my journal. 25 years in these mountains had taught me to trust my instincts, and right now they were telling me something wasn't quite right. The fog had left everything damp, and drops of water fell occasionally from the pine needles above, making soft tapping sounds that seemed too loud in the unusual quiet. I checked my watch, 11:15 in the morning, and wondered if maybe I should have picked a different spot this year. But I pushed that thought aside. I wasn't about to let a simple case of nerves get the better of me. After all, I had elk to find. The pre-dawn darkness wrapped around me like a familiar blanket as I settled into my tree stand. It was 4:30 in the morning, and the autumn air had that crisp bite that seasoned hunters know means good tracking conditions. I'd picked this spot carefully the evening before, a sturdy Douglas fir overlooking a natural funnel where two ridgelines converged into a shallow ravine. Perfect elk territory. 25 years of hunting had taught me the forest's morning routine. As first light approaches, it usually begins with the chickadees and nuthatches, followed by the squirrels, with the larger animals moving through just as dawn breaks. But something felt off this morning. The normal symphony of early risers never started. By 5:15, the silence had become oppressive. Not just quiet, silent. The kind of silence that makes your ears strain for any sound at all. Even the breeze through the pine needles seemed muted, as if the forest itself was holding its breath. I've experienced similar quiets before when mountain lions were in the area, but this felt different, more absolute. I shifted slightly in my stand, double-checking my safety harness out of habit. The movement sent a small shower of dewdrops pattering onto the forest floor 40 feet below. In the strange stillness, each drop sounded like a hammer strike. That's when the smell hit me. I've encountered every kind of animal musk you can imagine in these mountains: bear, elk, deer, lion, you name it. But this was different. It was a heavy, musky odor that reminded me of wet fur mixed with something else I couldn't quite place. Almost like decay, but not quite. The scent was strong enough to make my nose wrinkle, yet it came and went with the light breeze, never staying long enough for me to really analyze it. I reached for my journal, thinking I should document this, when a sound stopped my hand mid-motion, a knock. Not the light tap of a woodpecker or the crack of a falling branch. This was a deliberate heavy sound, like someone taking a baseball bat to a hollow tree. The sound echoed through the ravine, bouncing off the ridges before fading into that unnatural silence. My first thought was another hunter using a signal knock. It's not common practice anymore, but some old-timers still use it to communicate. In the field, I listened for a return signal, but none came. Just that smothering quiet again. The logical part of my brain, the part that had kept me alive through countless solo hunts, started cataloging possibilities. Maybe it was a dead tree finally giving way, or perhaps a bear marking territory. But neither explanation felt quite right. Bears don't make single, isolated knocks, and falling trees don't produce that kind of focused, purposeful sound. I found myself gripping my bow tighter, though I couldn't exactly say why. The first hints of dawn were starting to lighten the eastern sky, but the forest floor below remained lost in shadow. That strange musk drifted past again, stronger this time, making my eyes water slightly. Time seemed to slow to a crawl as I waited for either the normal morning sounds to resume or another knock to break the silence. Neither happened. The forest remained frozen in that unnatural quiet, like a held breath before something happens. My watch showed 6 o'clock when the first real light began filtering through the canopy. Usually, this would be prime time for elk movement, but the woods remained eerily still. No branches swaying with passing animals, no crunch of hooves on fallen leaves. Just that heavy silence and the occasional whiff of that peculiar odor. I've learned to trust my instincts over the years. They've kept me out of trouble more times than I can count. And right now, those instincts were sending up warning flags. I couldn't quite interpret it. Nothing was obviously wrong, but everything felt off. Like walking into your home and finding all your furniture shifted 2 inches to the left, familiar but unsettling. The growing daylight did nothing to dispel the strange atmosphere that had settled over my hunting spot. If anything, it made the silence feel more pronounced, more deliberate somehow. 20-5 years of hunting had taught me the forest's morning rhythms. First come the small stirrings, deer mice scurrying back to their burrows, the soft flutter of owls settling in for sleep. Then the early birds, chickadees and nuthatches announcing dawn's approach. But this morning, something was off. The silence hit me first. Not the peaceful quiet of a winter morning, but an emptiness that made the hair on my neck stand up. The chickadees I'd heard moments before had gone mute. Even the breeze seemed to hold its breath. That's when the smell reached me, a heavy, musky odor I'd never encountered in all my years in these woods. Not bear, not elk, not the skunk-like spray of a startled mule deer. This was different, wild, and primitive, like wet fur mixed with something else I couldn't place. I gripped my compound bow tighter, scanning the grey shadows below. The fog had settled thick in the ravine, turning the trees into dark sentinels. Then it came a single, solid knock that echoed through the canyon. The sound was sharp and deliberate, like someone striking a baseball bat against a dead tree. But at this hour, in this remote spot, something wasn't adding up. "Hello," I called out, keeping my voice low. No response, just that unnatural silence. Waited another hour, but the woods remained dead quiet. No elk, no birds, nothing. As the sun finally broke over the ridge, I decided to climb down and check the seep, a natural spring about 100 yards downslope. If any animals had passed through overnight, they'd have left sign there. The ground was still soft from yesterday's rain, perfect for tracking. I moved carefully, noting each detail in my small field journal, a habit that had served me well over the decades. But what I found at the seep stopped me cold. There, pressed deep into the mud, was a line of tracks unlike anything I'd seen before. My first thought was bear, but these weren't bear tracks. They were clearly footprints, roughly human in shape but massive, easily 16 inches long and 8 inches wide. What struck me most was how deliberately they were placed, one in front of the other in a straight line that no bear would make. My hands shook slightly as I sketched them in my journal, noting the depth, stride length, and distinctive toe patterns. I told myself they had to be distorted somehow. Maybe water overflow had enlarged them, or multiple animals had stepped in the same spots. But the clarity of each print argued otherwise. I pulled out my metal tape measure and carefully documented everything. The stride length between prints was consistent at around 4 feet, far longer than my own natural stride. Looking closer, I could see clear toe impressions and a distinct arch, almost human-like but wider, with a deeper heel strike. I'd covered these hills for decades and had never seen anything like this. Bears, mountain lions, elk. I knew all their signs. This was different. I found myself wishing there were other hunters around to confirm what I was seeing. But I hadn't heard a single gunshot or seen any vehicles at the trailhead. The solitude that normally brought me peace now felt heavy, oppressive. Standing up, I surveyed the surrounding forest. The fog was finally lifting, revealing the dense stands of fir and pine that marched up the ridgelines. Everything looked normal, familiar, except it wasn't. Those tracks changed everything. I carefully photographed them with my small camera, making sure to place my hunting knife next to one print for scale. The morning was warming up, but I couldn't shake the chill that had settled into my bones. I double-checked my bow, making sure. An arrow was nocked. Years of experience had taught me to trust my instincts. And right now, every one of them was telling me something wasn't right in these woods. The morning sun climbed higher as I methodically documented the massive tracks. In my journal, my hand trembled slightly as I sketched their outline, 16 inches long if they were an inch, with 5 distinct toe impressions. No bear track I'd ever seen looked quite like this. I tried to stay rational, measuring the stride length between prints 6 feet apart, in a deliberate straight line that no stumbling bear would make. The depth suggested serious weights behind whatever made them. I took photos with my small disposable camera, placing my hunting knife beside the tracks for scale. Over the next few days, the oddities began piling up. On my third morning, I found several saplings bent and twisted in ways that defied natural growth. They were thick ones too, nearly 2 inches in diameter, folded over head high in crossing patterns. I'd seen bears rub and mark trees plenty, but this was different, more deliberate, almost like trail markers. The knocking started at dusk. First just single, heavy thuds echoing across the ravine, then pairs of knocks answering each other from different ridges, wood on wood, but louder than any woodpecker. I told myself it had to be other hunters signaling, but I hadn't seen another soul in 5 days of hiking this territory. My elk kill bag, carefully hung 15 feet up between 2 pines, remained untouched, unusual in bear country. But one morning I found fresh mud smears on a boulder overlooking my camp, as if something massive had perched there watching. In the night, the marks were 8 feet up, where no normal creature would casually rest. The feeling of being watched grew stronger. Twice, while stalking elk sign, I caught movement in my peripheral vision, just quick glimpses of something large and dark slipping behind trees. The wildlife seemed to sense it too. The usual deer and small game I'd expect to see was scarce, and when I did spot them, they seemed twitchy and alert. Each night, I meticulously recorded the day's strange encounters in my journal, trying to maintain the objective tone I'd used for decades of hunting observations. But it was getting harder to explain away the mounting oddities. The musky odor would drift through camp at random times, always accompanied by that unnatural silence falling over the forest. On the 6th morning, I found my carefully stacked firewood had been scattered, with one massive log propped upright against a tree, something that couldn't have happened by chance or wind. The log was too heavy for me to lift alone, yet there it stood like some deliberate message. I kept my bow close and began setting up makeshift alarms, strings of tin cans. Around camp, reflective markers on trees to catch my flashlight beam. Sleep came harder each night as the knocking continued, sometimes so close it seemed to be right at the edge of my campsite. But whenever I shone my light into the darkness, I caught only the briefest impression of movement, like something massive, melting into the shadows. My journal entries grew longer, more detailed, as I tried to document every anomaly. The bent saplings appeared to mark some kind of boundary. I never found any beyond a certain point, heading east. The tracks would appear overnight in muddy spots I'd cleared the evening before. Always that same 16-inch length. Whatever was out there, it seemed to be studying me as much as I was tracking it. Years of hunting had taught me to trust my instincts. Something intelligent was moving through these woods. Something that didn't fit any animal behavior I'd ever encountered. It kept its distance, but made its presence known, as if sending deliberate signals. The question was, what did it want me to understand? I checked my watch, 5:30 in the evening. The golden autumn light was already starting to fade between the towering pines. Perfect timing to set up my trail camera. I'd used this particular Moultrie game cam for 3 seasons now, and it hadn't failed me yet. My boots crunched over fallen pine needles as I made my way to the well-worn game path I'd been monitoring. It cut through a natural funnel between 2 steep ridges, exactly the kind of terrain elk would use. The path showed regular traffic, but something about the sign felt off. The tracks were smeared, as if whatever made them had been trying to obscure its prints. Just need one clear shot, I muttered to myself as I secured the camera to a sturdy lodgepole pine, about 4 feet up. The height was important. Too low and you miss body shots. Too high and you only catch tops of heads. I adjusted the angle carefully, making sure the infrared sensor would catch anything moving through. Back at camp, I heated up some beef stew on my small propane stove, the familiar routine helping settle my nerves. The temperature was dropping fast as night settled in. I pulled my wool cap lower and added another log to my small fire, watching sparks spiral up into the darkening sky. The first unusual sound came around 9 o'clock, a sharp crack like a baseball bat hitting a tree trunk, echoing from somewhere up the ridge. I sat up straighter, straining to listen. Another crack followed, maybe 15 minutes later, this time closer, maybe 200 yards out. "Hello," I called out, my voice sounding thin in the vast darkness. No response except the soft whisper of wind through the pines. The footsteps started around midnight. I'd been dozing fitfully in my tent, but snapped awake at the sound of heavy, deliberate steps circling the perimeter of my camp. Whatever it was kept its distance, maybe 50 yards out, moving with a slow, shuffling gait through the underbrush. My hand tightened on the flashlight beside my sleeping bag, but I kept it off. Years of hunting had taught me that darkness can sometimes be your ally. Better to listen, to build a picture with your other senses. The pacing continued for what felt like hours. Occasionally, branches would snap under unseen weight, followed by periods of complete silence. The fire had died down to glowing coals, casting weird shadows on the tent walls. Around 3 in the morning, a different sound cut through the night. A low, throaty whooping call that made the hair stand up on my neck. It wasn't like anything I'd heard in these woods before. Not elk, not wolf, not mountain lion. The call echoed off the ridge faces, seeming to come from multiple directions at once. I lay there rigid, barely breathing, as the footsteps finally moved off into the distance. The rest of the night passed in tense silence. I didn't sleep. When first light finally crept over the ridgeline, I waited a full 30 minutes before emerging from my tent, my bow close at hand. The morning was crisp and clear, with heavy dew coating everything. I did a careful sweep of my camp's perimeter, looking for signs of whatever had visited in the night. The ground was too pine needle covered for clear prints, but I found fresh breaks in the branches of a serviceberry bush about 8 feet up, way too high for deer or elk. Something big had moved through here. My hands shook slightly as I made my way back to check the trail camera. I told myself I was just cold, but the truth was, those night sounds had rattled me more than I wanted to admit. 25 years of hunting these mountains, and I'd never experienced anything quite like it. The camera was exactly where I'd left it, still firmly attached to the tree. I pressed the review button, heart pounding as I waited to see what might have passed by in the night. But when the screen flickered to life, my stomach dropped. The camera was dead, its batteries completely drained, despite being brand new yesterday. Whatever had been out there in the darkness remained a mystery, at least for now. I checked my watch 5:30 in the evening. The golden autumn light was already starting to fade between the towering pines. Perfect timing to set up my trail camera. I'd used this particular Moultrie game cam for 3 seasons now, and it hadn't failed me yet. My boots crunched over fallen pine needles as I made my way to the well-worn game path I'd been monitoring. It cut through a natural funnel between 2 rocky outcrops, the kind of spot where elk often traveled. The musky scent I'd noticed earlier still lingered in the cool air, making my nose wrinkle. Just need one good shot, I muttered to myself. As I pulled the camera from my pack, the familiar routine of setting it up helped calm my nerves. I checked the batteries, fresh ones I'd packed specifically for this trip. The memory card clicked firmly into place. 20 years of hunting had taught me to be methodical, to leave nothing to chance. I found a sturdy pine about 15 feet from the trail and secured the camera with the heavy-duty strap, making sure it was at the right height and angle. The infrared sensor would trigger for anything that passed by. After setting the date and time, I tested it by walking past. The red light blinked reassuringly. Back at camp, I tried to focus on my usual evening routine, heating up some beef stew, checking my gear, writing in my journal. But my mind kept drifting to the camera out there in the growing darkness. The night seemed to press in closer than usual. Twice I heard those distinct knocking sounds echoing through the trees, and once what sounded like heavy footsteps moving parallel to my camp, just out of sight in the thick brush. I barely slept, tossing and turning in my sleeping bag as branches cracked in the distance. Around 3 in the morning, something large moved past my tent, so close I could hear its breathing. I lay perfectly still, my hand on my hunting knife, until the sounds faded. First light couldn't come soon enough. As soon as I could see well enough to walk safely, I grabbed my pack and headed straight for the trail camera. My stomach dropped as I approached. Something was wrong. Even from 20 feet away, I could see the camera wasn't where I'd left it. Drawing closer, my heart started pounding. The heavy-duty strap that had secured it to the tree was torn clean through, not cut, but ripped apart like paper. The camera lay face down in the dirt several feet from the tree. When I picked it up, I noticed scratches across its housing, as if something with large fingers had gripped it roughly. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the camera. The battery compartment was still sealed, but when I checked the memory card slot, my blood ran cold. It was empty, not damaged, not fallen out. The card had been deliberately removed. I searched the ground thoroughly, pushing aside leaves and debris, looking for any sign of the missing card. Nothing. This wasn't a random accident or weather damage. Something or someone had purposefully taken that memory card. Sitting back on my heels, I tried to think logically. Another hunter, maybe. But I hadn't seen any signs of other people in the area. No camps, no boot prints, no distant shots. Besides, who would go to the trouble of destroying a trail cam strap just to steal a memory card? Why not just take the whole camera if theft was the goal? The alternative made my skin crawl. Whatever had been moving around my camp last night, whatever had made those knocks and left those massive tracks, it had been intelligent enough to not just disable the camera, but to remove the very thing that might have captured its image. I wrote everything down in my journal with shaking hands, trying to capture every detail while it was fresh in my mind. The torn strap, the scratches on the camera, the missing card. Each fact seemed to point towards something I wasn't ready to accept, something that challenged everything I thought I knew about these woods. I checked my watch. 5:30 in the morning. The crisp dawn air bit at my face as I emerged from my tent, ready to check the trail camera I'd set up the previous evening. Something felt off right away. The woods were dead quiet, not even a single bird call breaking the silence. My heart sank when I reached the game trail. The camera hung askew, dangling by one torn strap. Someone or something had yanked it, almost completely free from the tree. I hurried forward, my boots crunching on frost-covered leaves. The device was flipped upside down, half buried in dirt and debris. "What the hell?" I muttered, carefully lifting it free. The housing was intact. But when I opened the compartment, my stomach tightened. The memory card was gone. Not fallen out, deliberately removed. I searched the ground thoroughly, sweeping aside leaves and loose soil, but found nothing. Walking back to camp, I tried to make sense of it. Another hunter could have tampered with it, I supposed, but I hadn't seen any sign of other people in days. And why take just the memory card? If someone was trying to steal it, why leave the expensive camera behind? That's when I spotted something that made me stop dead in my tracks. About 50 feet from my campsite, a strange structure caught my eye. At first glance, it looked like fallen branches, but as I drew closer, I could see the deliberate arrangement. Someone or something had woven together dozens of sticks and small branches into a crude lattice pattern, forming a kind of screen about 4 feet high and 6 feet wide. I approached it cautiously, studying how the branches had been carefully interlaced. This wasn't random. It showed clear purpose and basic engineering. Some of the sticks had been stripped of their bark. Others were broken to specific lengths to fit the pattern. No animal I knew could create something like this. My hands shook slightly as I began dismantling it, carefully pulling apart the woven branches. It took nearly 20 minutes to completely break down the structure. I scattered the sticks widely, trying to make it look natural, like simple forest debris. But the whole time, the hair on the back of my neck stood up. I couldn't shake the feeling of being watched. I spent a restless night in my tent, straining to identify every snap of a twig and rustle of leaves. The usual forest sounds seemed amplified, taking on new meaning. Twice, I heard heavy footsteps moving past my camp. But when I shone my flashlight out, I saw nothing but shadows between the trees. The next morning dawned grey and cold. I unzipped my tent and immediately noticed something was different. My heart nearly stopped. There, about 30 yards from where I dismantled the original structure, stood another lattice screen. This one was slightly larger, maybe 7 feet across, with a distinctive arch woven into the top. The engineering was the same, carefully intertwined branches forming a deliberate pattern, but the design had evolved. I stood staring at it for a long time, coffee cup growing cold in my hand. This wasn't random. This wasn't coincidence. Something out here was not only intelligent enough to build these structures, but was seemingly responding to my actions. It felt like some kind of communication, or maybe a challenge. The missing memory card, the repeated structures. It was like being toyed with by something that wanted me to know it was there. Something that wanted me to understand I wasn't alone in these woods. The thoughts sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with the morning air. I documented everything meticulously in my journal, drawing detailed sketches of both structures. My hands were steady as I worked, but my mind was racing. 25 years of hunting these mountains, and I'd never encountered anything like this. Whatever was out here, it was no ordinary animal, and it seemed very interested in me. My eyes snapped open at 3:15 in the morning. Something had woken me, a sound just at the edge of hearing, like careful footsteps in the leaves. I lay perfectly still in my sleeping bag, straining to listen. The October air was bitter cold, and my breath made tiny clouds inside the tent. That's when I noticed my kill bag was missing. It should have been hanging from the sturdy branch where I'd secured it, just 10 feet from my tent. My heart began to pound. I'd been hunting these woods for over 20 years, and I knew better than to leave food where bears could get it. That bag had been properly suspended, well out of reach. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent as quietly as possible. The beam cut through the darkness, sweeping across the frost-covered ground. No sign of the bag near the branch. Scattered contents or torn fabric that would indicate a bear attack. "Hello," I called out, my voice seeming unnaturally loud in the still night air. "Anyone out there?" Only silence answered. The woods felt wrong. That same unnatural quiet I'd been noticing for days now. No owls, no rustling, nothing. I pulled on my boots and jacket, grabbed my rifle, and began searching in widening circles around the camp. The flashlight beam caught something about 30 yards out, my kill bag, sitting neatly upright against the base of a pine tree. My hands trembled slightly as I approached it. The bag was completely intact. No tears, no claw marks, no sign of animal interference. It had simply been moved. Deliberately, the rope I'd used to hang it was still tied perfectly, just as I'd left it. Whatever had relocated the bag had untied the other end from the branch with careful precision. "This isn't possible," I muttered to myself. "Bears don't untie knots. Mountain lions don't carefully relocate gear. And other hunters don't sneak into camps in the middle of the night, just to move a kill bag 30 yards. I thought about the trail. Camera that had been dismantled, its memory card removed. The strange stick structure I'd found yesterday morning, branches woven together in that purposeful pattern, and now this. Something was trying to send me a message, something intelligent, enough to handle rope, to recognize and disable a trail camera, to construct deliberate patterns with sticks. Something that wanted me to know it was there, watching, waiting. I stood there in the dark, rifle ready, scanning the tree line. The sense of being observed was overwhelming now. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I imagined eyes tracking my movements from just beyond the reach of my flashlight beam. Swallowing hard, I grabbed the kill bag and backed slowly toward camp, checking over my shoulder every few steps. Whatever was out there, it was trying to drive me out, testing me, pressuring me, letting me know this was its territory. I've never been one to scare easily. 20+ years of solo hunting had taught me to stay calm, to think rationally, to trust my instincts. But this was different. This wasn't normal predator behavior. This was calculated, deliberate, almost human. Back in my tent, I kept my rifle close and tried to steady my breathing. Sleep wasn't going to come again tonight. I could feel it out there, whatever it was, probably watching my flashlight beam through the tent wall, waiting to see what I would do next. Dawn couldn't come soon enough. I huddled in my tent that night, too wired to sleep after finding the kill bag moved. The mist had rolled in thick, transforming the forest into a ghostly landscape. My flashlight beam couldn't penetrate more than 15 feet through the dense fog. At exactly 2:37 in the morning, I heard them, deliberate footsteps crunching through the frost-covered leaves, slow, measured, circling my position. My hands trembled slightly as I gripped my rifle. 20 years of hunting experience screamed that this wasn't normal animal behavior. No bear or mountain lion moves like that, with such obvious purpose, such clear intent. Crunch, pause, crunch, pause, crunch, pause. The footsteps completed a full circle around my camp, then another. Whatever it was, it wanted me to know it was there. My breath came in shallow bursts as I crouched low, every muscle tense, every nerve firing. Through the mist, about 30 yards out, something moved. I raised my rifle, squinting through the murk. A dark figure swayed at the tree line, tall, upright, distinctly bipedal. My flashlight beam caught it for just a moment before it shifted slightly, keeping to the shadows. But that glimpse was enough. The figure stood at least 7 feet tall, its broad shoulders tapering to a powerful chest. Not a bear, not a person in a suit. This was something else entirely. It remained there, barely visible through the fog, watching me. I could feel its gaze as surely as I could feel the cold sweat running down my back. Time seemed to stretch like taffy as we held this terrible standoff, neither of us moving. The woods had fallen completely silent. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The standoff continued, each second stretching like hours in the dense fog. My muscles ached from holding my crouched position, but I didn't dare move. The massive figure remained at the tree line, its dark outline swaying slightly against the misty backdrop. Then, something happened that turned my blood to ice. Slowly, deliberately, the figure raised one of its arms. The movement was smooth, almost graceful, nothing like the jerky motions of a bear standing on its hind legs. The arm extended outward, palm facing upward, fingers spread wide. It wasn't threatening. It was almost like it was reaching out. My bow trembled violently in my hands. I tried to nock an arrow, but my fingers wouldn't cooperate. My entire body shook with a combination of cold, fear, and something else. Something I couldn't quite name. There was an uncanny familiarity to the gesture, something almost human. The fog swirled between us, occasionally thinning just enough to reveal more details of the figure's outline. Its arm remained extended, unwavering, like it was waiting for something. For me. My breath came in short, visible puffs in the cold air as I struggled with the overwhelming sensation that this wasn't just some random encounter. This felt intentional. Personal. I remained frozen there, caught between my instinct to flee and an inexplicable pull to understand what I was witnessing. The figure's reaching gesture seemed to carry meaning beyond simple threat or challenge. It felt like an invitation, or perhaps a test. But to what end, I couldn't begin to guess. The figure seemed to hesitate for one endless moment, its arm still extended toward me. Then, like smoke dispersing in wind, it simply melted back into the darkness. 1 second, it was there, a solid presence against the tree line, and the next, nothing. The woods fell into an absolute stillness that felt even heavier than before. I stayed frozen in my crouch, bow still trembling in my grip, listening so hard my ears ached. Minutes stretched by. The fog continued its lazy drift between the trees. But that commanding presence was gone. Still, I didn't dare move. Years of hunting had taught me the value of patience, and right now, every instinct told me to stay put. As the night crawled toward dawn, I replayed the encounter over and over, in my mind, trying to make sense of what I'd seen. That reaching gesture haunted me. It hadn't seemed aggressive. If anything, it had felt almost peaceful, like someone trying to make contact. But why? Was it a warning to leave its territory? Some kind of primitive greeting? Or was I reading too much into it, seeing human intention where there was none? The first pale light of morning began to seep through the mist. My muscles screamed from holding the same position for hours, but I'd barely noticed the discomfort. My mind was too busy cataloguing every detail of the encounter, the massive height, the broad shoulders, the way it had moved with such deliberate purpose. Everything I'd experienced over the past few days suddenly shifted into sharp focus. The tracks, the strange structures, the relocated kill bag, they weren't random events. They were pieces of a puzzle I hadn't even known I was solving. As dawn fully broke, the forest around me gradually returned to life. Birds began their morning songs, and a light breeze stirred the branches overhead. But something had fundamentally changed. The woods I thought I knew so well now held mysteries I couldn't explain. I sat across from the deputy in the small sheriff's station, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The fluorescent lights made everything feel stark and unreal compared to the shadowy forest I'd left behind. So you're saying this figure deliberately took your trail camera card? The deputy's pen hovered over his notebook, his tone measured but skeptical. I could see him struggling to maintain his professional composure. Yes, and there were tracks larger than any boot print I've ever seen. I pulled out my journal, flipping to the detailed sketches I'd made. I've been hunting these woods for 25 years. I know what bear signs look like. This was different. The Forest Service ranger, who'd joined us at the deputy's request, leaned forward to examine my drawings. She adjusted her glasses, her expression carefully neutral. Mr. Kearns, we've had reports of vandalism in that area. Could have been someone messing with hunters at night, miles from any road access. I shook my head. And what about the stick structures? The way my kill bag was moved without any tears or claw marks. The deputy and ranger exchanged glances. I recognized that look, the one that said they were humoring me while mentally filing this under another wild story. Listen, the deputy said, stress and exhaustion can play tricks on your mind out there. Maybe I wasn't exhausted, I interrupted, my voice firmer than I intended. I wasn't drunk. I wasn't seeing things. Something intelligent was out there, watching me, interacting with my camp. The ranger cleared her throat. We'll note your report, Mr. Kearns, and we'll increase patrols in that section. But I could tell from her clipped tone that this would be filed away and forgotten. Yet when I showed them the photographs of the tracks I'd taken, I caught something in their expressions, a flicker of uncertainty that matched my own lingering unease. I sat across from the deputy in the small sheriff's station, my hands wrapped around a paper cup of coffee that had long since gone cold. The fluorescent lights made everything feel stark and unreal compared to the shadowy forest I'd left behind. So you're saying this figure deliberately took your trail camera card." The deputy's pen hovered over his notebook, his tone measured but skeptical. I could see him struggling to maintain his professional composure. "Yes, and there were tracks larger than any boot print I've ever seen." I pulled out my journal, flipping to the detailed sketches I'd made. "I've been hunting these woods for 25 years. I know what bear signs look like." This was different. The Forest Service ranger leaned against the wall, arms crossed. She studied my drawings with more interest than the deputy, but I could tell she was searching for a rational explanation. "These impressions could be distorted by mud or rain," she offered, "and trail cams do malfunction. The card wasn't malfunctioning, it was removed." "And what about the stick structure? The way my kill bag was moved?" My voice rose slightly, and I forced myself to take a breath. "Look, I understand how this sounds. I wouldn't believe it either, if I hadn't seen it with my own eyes." The deputy and ranger exchanged glances. "We'll file a report," the deputy said carefully, "and we'll increase patrols in that area, check for any unusual activity." But I could see in their faces they'd already filed me away in their minds. Another spooked hunter with an overactive imagination. Still, something in the ranger's expression told me she wasn't entirely dismissing my account. She kept looking back at my journal, particularly at the sketch of that massive footprint. I left the station knowing they'd follow procedure, but also knowing deep down that no increased patrols would find what I'd encountered. That presence. In the woods it chose when and to whom it revealed itself. In the months that followed, I found myself avoiding solo hunts altogether. My trusty bow gathered dust in the garage, and my hunting journal remained closed on my desk. The few times I ventured into the woods, I stuck to well-traveled trails and always brought company. My wife noticed the change in me first. "You used to live for October," she said one evening, watching me decline yet another invitation from my hunting buddies. "Now you barely look at your gear." She was right. 25 years of confident backcountry experience had been shaken by those few days in the clear water. The memory of that figure's outstretched arm haunted me not with fear exactly, but with the weight of something I couldn't explain. My journal entries from before that hunt read like a different person wrote them. Detailed notes about elk patterns, weather conditions, and trail signs. But the last few pages told a different story, filled with anxious observations about unexplained noises and that overwhelming sense of being watched. The Clearwater National Forest stretches over 1.9 million acres of wilderness. I'd always taken pride in knowing its terrain, reading its moods, understanding its rhythms. But now I knew there were things out there beyond my understanding, intelligent, things that could choose to reveal themselves or remain hidden. The deputy's report probably sits in some filing cabinet, gathering dust alongside other unexplained incidents. The ranger occasionally calls to check in, though we both know there's nothing concrete to discuss. But sometimes, when she mentions unusual tracks or strange occurrences in that area, I catch a note of uncertainty in her voice. The wilderness has its own rules, its own wisdom. Whatever watched me from the shadows that night, whatever reached out across that misty clearing, it chose to let me go. Not everyone who ventures into those remote places may be granted the same choice. My old hunting journal stays closed now. Some knowledge changes you, and some mysteries are better left unexplored in the dark spaces between the trees. Thanks for watching. If any part of this story lingered with you, consider subscribing. I'll be here again tomorrow, sharing another tale that speaks to the soul.